Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachael Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Well, it is an honor again to be with my great co-host, Rachael Clinton Chen, and our guest, which is our boss, Cathy Lorzell. And Cathy, as we ended last time, what maybe the audience didn't hear, but at least some of us did. Was there someone being put to death?
No, that would be my children. I, as was true for a lot of you, am working from home these days and have been going on, I don't even know, 6 months to 12 years. Can't quite tell how long it's been happening now. And so I'm up in our little home office room. I kicked my 4-year-old out of his room and made it into an office. And now he bunks with his brother. But turns out they're loud. So they play.
What I thought, but maybe I was wrong, was that we were hearing the prophetic cry of your family, exposing something of their isolation, their lack of connection with their primary parent. But nonetheless, I'm probably wrong.
No, I mean, I was teaching at Cert 1 a couple of days ago, and as I was live in front of 156 virtual people, my son walks in the door to see if he could watch another Pokemon episode. I was like, so the struggle is real. It's a lot happening for all of us.
Yeah, and just as a quick critique, and then we'll jump in. You could have given him a mic, and then we could have paid him, and we could have worked toward his college education.
That's right. Or his therapy fund that I'm more committed to than even his college education.
Oh, amen.
I feel like this is a great segue into how what are the wounds that might primarily be for the king/queen, and how does a queen bring order to a kingdom in the season of COVID? I more was just thinking about like even the kingdom of your own home.
Where I kick people out, so I kick the little ones out.
Yeah, I'm waiting for a good answer, Cathy.
Oh my gosh, I wish I had one, you guys. You've already heard the chaos that's going down beneath us, so that will probably continue. No, well, I think... Oh, go ahead, Dan. Yeah.
No, the reality is we're again playing with two major archetypes, and that is the interplay between what it means to be a widower, making the deep assumption that there is something about being bereft of, in the middle of some level of significant loss of love, that is so crucial for a king or queen to be able to hold and to move into. And certainly, as you've named it, even with great humor, this has been a horrendous time with so many losses, so much complexity, not only culturally, but in terms of families and the effect of whether you're going back to work, staying at home, children going to school or not going to school. In my young 68 years, ain't never been an era like this. So this interplay of being a widow and being a queen, love for you to begin to put words to what you have been thinking through, particularly for our book about this.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I think we've said this over the last couple of podcasts, but, the queen category is a primary place of real comfortability for me. That's the spirit of the queen is really how I lead. A lot of the work that I do is kind of creating boundaries, figuring out the systems or the order that needs to be in place for things to kind of come to be. And more than anything, I think I find myself being the one who can look at a problem and then say, okay, we can figure out a way through. And these are the 5 steps. This is how we're going to go, and everyone get on board and let's do it. I think and again, each manifestation, each person is going to bring a very different sort of way to the queen archetype, right? So all of it is storied. The way I stayed safe in my home, the way that I created meaning was through creating order and finding a way through some of the chaos and confusion that was present in my day-to-day life. Oftentimes when I talk about my work towards queen, and then the underbelly of that in terms of widow is often around growing up in a military household, where we moved every 2 years from the time I was born until the age of 10 or 11. And that's, a lot of families have that story. That's my story. But there's something about the chaos that ensues by having to literally shift cultures every 2 years, that I had to find something of order within me in order to make sense of the world around me. Oftentimes, the role of family is to create order, to create the containment and attunement and rupture and repair that's necessary for a child to feel safe. I found that I had to create that on my own in order to feel like I could make sense of the chaos in the world around me as it was shifting. So I think when we talk about all three of these archetypes, or really six, it's all how you play it out in your own role is very dependent on what your story is and how you chose to mitigate the harm, the rupture, the difficulty that you were going through. So for me, when I feel discomfort or the way I soothe is through creating control and creating order. And that's both good, that can create organizations. It also is bad and can create a lot of chaos.
Well, and you are on one side of the coin and I was on the other. We were both kings and queens, and I was the little prince who was put into the position with two deeply flawed, broken human beings to make decisions on their behalf as young as 5, 6, 7 years of age, to a point where I ruled my home, not because I was a terror, as much as I was put in the responsibility to be the one to make those decisions. And I came to hate any kind of leadership. The notion of having to take a group of people and move from point A to point B, that is as obnoxious of a calling as I can imagine. Yet, I've also found myself in countless different situations playing that role out, but often with a unwillingness or something close to the category of sabotage to get me out of having to do that. So where you came to survive, it was also the place where I was dying. But we cannot help but be leaders. Literally, you cannot help but influence others. And that notion of being a widower, why is that so important to engage in order for the heart to actually come to be a wise and kind ruler?
So widow is real close to me. So whenever I teach this content, I can teach on the role of the king and queen really well. I always lose my words and my sense of where I'm heading when I talk about widow. So Rachael, I'm very curious. I'll jump in, but I feel like, Rachael, you have a lot of really good language about this. And I would love to into it right
yes, she does, but you're also bailing, and I'm looking at Rachel's face, and it's like, you're on, sweetheart.
She said me. She
I got you. I got you. Yeah. I mean, but isn't this the truth, right? Like, I think the things that are often closest to us are sometimes the hardest to see and name with clarity, which is why we need each other and we need help naming. When I think about kings and queens, I think about lovers. Like, they are ultimately lovers. They are imagining a world where flourishing is the status quo, where we are living in the ways we're most meant to. So the category of widow or widower makes sense as some of the core woundings, because there's a sense of knowing you're made for love, knowing there's a way in which you could create a world and where love flourishes, where there's a mutual giving and receiving of pleasure, where justice and mercy reigns supreme without effort, on behalf of all. And so on a very like grand scale, how is that like you're constantly working in the midst of chaos and brokenness to try to bring about these realities? But I think especially where these wounds come as children, it is this just profound sense of where love has been lost. And it's not just that like maybe love has never been tasted. It's actually a sense of knowing in your bones what love is, and also knowing what happens when it's lost, whether it's lost through rejection or whether it's lost through envy, someone envying how glorious and beautiful and brilliant you are and needing to mar. So it is a very fragmenting wounding. And so I think when love has been lost and you're trying to survive a world, there's just different ways I think the widow seeks. And as we've talked about, like in some ways, the queen and king role is like you need the prophets and the priest, and oftentimes have very priestly and prophetic parts of yourself, because it makes a lot of sense that way, especially when you think about, categories of faith, hope, and love, which we've in some ways been talking about. The orphan and the priest, this kind of grounding, Ebenezer, naming, storytelling, memory space, and the kind of hopeful dreamer. Well, the king queen is dealing with the realm of love. And so the widowed heart can either move toward a kind of either like, I won't have need for I won't have desire. I will have no need for pleasure. I will cut off this capacity and therefore be kind of free to kind of rule and reign like unencumbered. Or it can sometimes lead to a kind of indulgence in pleasure that actually keeps the heart from the love we're most meant for. And it's so funny because I would say this was a category I could talk about all day long, but also one of my deepest wounds, which is why Queen is probably still a place I'm so hesitant to really step into, because I can bear estrangement. I know how to survive being an orphan. Like being cut off from love is so unbearable to me. Mm-hmm. And just thinking about what it costs to tend to that in order to have more freedom.
And see if you two, not so much agree, differ, but where you go with this. Priests, for the most part, when they're good priests, draw people, invite people. There's a kind of love for a good priest. Prophets don't tend to engender a whole lot of just deep love. You might respect and honor, but oftentimes they are more prickly. But the ambivalence with regard to a queen or king, that's intense. When the king or queen is as you would wish for them to be on your behalf, there's nothing greater. Oh, I've got the most incredible boss, or this person is fabulous. But the moment that decisions or directions get taken that are not in accord, there is no position, I think, even more so than the prophet, more vilified than a queen or king who's not doing what we, the people, we, the community, we, the committee, desires. And so you're in the crosshairs, Cathy, a whole lot more than priestly Rachael and prophetic Dan.
Oy, I mean, I don't want to downplay where Rachael, you and Dan have had to be the crosshairs, but yes, I mean, I do think that there's something. I was during the season, I was talking to my husband one night, and I was like, some people grow up and they're like accountants, and they go to work and then they do their job and then they come home and like that's it. It's like, why can't I just quit my job and then just become an accountant? And obviously it's ridiculous. First of all, I'm terrible at math. and second of all, there are actually people who really have a lot of joy out of being an accountant that I just couldn't be. But I think part of that was trying to escape the weight of the mantle of leadership. And the weight and the mantle is intense. And it needs to be intense because what you're called to manage is public typically. It has a lot of consequence depending, and you're asked to make very difficult decisions that are not necessarily going to be popular, but are going to be the wisest decision that you could make in the moment. And when you do make those decisions, you also need to be the first to own your failure. So there's a tremendous amount of weight that comes from the station of the king or the queen. Many of us find ourselves in these roles quite out of compulsion almost. Like there is no other way. I know I can't actually step back and stay away from these positions. I'll step into them like water into a stream. Like there's a stream bed, I'm in it. Like, and I'm moving through the rocks and I don't know how I got there. And now I'm in a different position, but I can't take my water out of the stream bed now. Like I'm in the flow. And I think the important part for a king or a queen is one, to understand it's a unique calling. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone is going to feel more comfortable by trying to create places of flourishing for the whole. It's a unique station in the same way that a priest is a unique station and a prophet is a unique station. It's going to mean that you're exposed because you cannot make the calls that you need to make and lead in the way that you're meant to lead if you're also not willing to take the risky measures needed in order to make a decision and stand by it.
Well, and that's how I understand the importance of widower. If you have lost a spouse, you certainly know what we're putting words to, but you could be married and be a widow. You could be unmarried and be a widow. And so we're talking about death. You have faced the death of love. And in some ways, a king or queen, as Rachael put it earlier, is committed to human flourishing. They're setting the table. They're hosting the meal. They're providing the opportunity to flourish in the goodness of God. And in that, it really is the love that they wish to create for others, but also the inevitability will be, by doing so, you will be killed. There will be death. You will know suffering, your own through repentance of misuse of your power, but also the loss of when you find that the favor you once had is no longer there. And that's where I see so many kings and queens resorting structurally to a form of narcissism to escape and to imbue themselves in their own grandiosity. Within many ways, you see people just don't understand me. I'm always trying to do good, but people are, and you begin to develop that paranoia, that narcissistic edge, the grandiosity. So to be truly, even if it's a misused term, a true servant leader who knows what it is to be at the table rather than sitting at the table, that is a rare leader and requires a lot of death to self, death to dreams, death to, in one sense, to power, to utilize power in a way that brings honor and goodness.
Yes. I think when I think about my own story as a queen, the biggest mistake that I've made is denying my desire for mutuality. For acknowledging how deeply I long to be loved, how deeply I long to love. And I think what so often happens for a king and queens who have a lot of gifting and being able to lead is that they're not connected to that desire, and therefore their power becomes their bedmate. And the power, the structure, the success becomes the thing that becomes their lover. and because they have looked back over their life and have not been able to bear the losses, bear the envy, bear what vulnerability has cost them, and how it's exposed them to more ridicule, to more harm, to more death. And I think it's when the queen or the king can connect to the underbelly of their desire that they actually can heal and become the king and the queen they are actually meant to be. But so much of the way that even our society, our churches, we set people up to be exceptional, to be set apart, and to not be human. And we then send them off to go be bigger than life, to be more, to be in these stations set apart. And then ultimately there's a catastrophic fall. That always happens at some point. Again, Dan, because of what you're talking about, they've made the power, the status, and they fear the fall. They know how far up they've gone. And they also understand how far where they are is actually from who they are as a human being. And that becomes terrifying. So they have to grip on to whatever it is, whatever structures they've built. They have to turn away the prophet. They have to turn away the priest in order to remain intact based on who they think they are. And then they choose people to mirror them who are going to show them, oh, no, you're still great. You're still good. That's when you get the yes men, the yes women coming in to surround the leaders. We see that all the time. And they've cast out the people who are actually seeing who they are and offering something of mutuality and love and desire.
Huge. Let's just state it. David, king, assaults Bathsheba sexually, kills Uriah. And we can say in a form, how many leaders in the context of the community of God and beyond the community of God have exercised their power to possess, use, and violate. Rachael, it's one of the areas that you have guided us in is the issue of spiritual abuse. So we're really in and at the cusp of talking about how spiritual abuse almost always comes out of narcissistic leaders, but also, so well put, Cathy, it comes because, at least to a degree, we set leaders up to die in that way, not excusing them by any stretch, but also saying the structure has to be addressed where we pick highly authoritative, debonair, wise in appearance leaders, and then be set up for not only their harm, but our harm.
Well, I love, Cathy, how you named your desire for mutuality. And I am looking at even your own leadership in our own organization, and how in some ways having to engage that desire has led to some attempts to bring some structural changes that have a different imagination for there being room for more than one king or queen to share leadership. And that's also not a model that even comes to our imagination or that comes to our mind in what you're talking about, that setup, that hierarchical setup of we need one exceptional person, which actually I think if we're letting Jesus be the primary model for these offices, there is a sense in a way that part of Jesus's kingliness, I mean, obviously the work of the cross and the resurrection and the ascension, but also certainly the way in which he was a servant leader and knew that there was a sense of him needing his own companions. I don't think in any way there's a naivete that then co-leadership or, inviting more kings and queens to the table means each king or queen won't still deal with a kind of loneliness that comes with the office of bearing the responsibility of what you hold. But I don't know. I think that there's repentance that needs to keep happening in the ways in which we have set people up.
Yeah. I think we need to radically rethink how we imagine leadership. And this is probably maybe for another podcast another day, but yeah, I think my own journey through both blessing the places where my king and queen are good and bring a lot of capacity and gifting, but also where I have been profoundly lonely, profoundly alone in my leadership, profoundly kind of lost in both the ache of the mutuality and also the pressure of success in a way that can make the queen go mad. And I think that's not that. I was doing research for the book on the fairy tales that have to do with kings and queens and the archetype of the king and queen. And like Dan said, in most fairy tales and most cultures, the king or the queen would thrive for about 10 to 15 years. And then they would either be symbolically killed off in a ritual, or they literally would be taken from the throne and then replaced by a younger version of a fresh one that hadn't made the mistakes that they had made, and all these things. And so I do think that there's something that we can address as a culture to say, leadership doesn't have to look that way. We actually have another way forward. And what Rachael was referring to, as the Allender Center has grown, I'm now a co-leader with Jen Oyama Murphy. And we have co-authority, co-leadership, and we are really trying to build a coalition that turns the idea that we lead from the top down. And we're now building a coalition structure that actually allows for mutuality, allows for flourishing, allows for voices to be at the table, also allows for significant parts of the leadership community to be filled by prophets and priests and other kings and queens, and allow the fullness of the table to be set so that we can all move together for the glory of God and be able to honor what we bring to the table, not diminish it, but actually increase it because it's collective. It's a community. And I think that is what Jesus shows us, even at the table, at the Last Supper. There's a sense of, I will serve you, you serve each other, and there is a hope that the kingdom of God can be known on this earth. That's something I'm willing to get behind.
Oh, it's glorious. And it has been a mess to do. Gosh. I mean, disruptive, hard, prophetic, priestly, kingly, queenly conversations to get where we are. But where we are, without any naivete, is better than where we were. And it moves us into, shall we say, giving more room for people at the table. Before we end, I just want to make a quick shift, and that is, we all strive to grow in all three offices, but I am more of a prophet. Rachael, you're more of a priest. Cathy, you're more of a queen. How do you get along with the others on this screen?
Well, first of all, I would say it's mostly been very playful, irritating at times, hard at times. But what I more feel is gratitude for what it feels like when you are surrounded by those who are different than you and who have different giftings and how that shapes you. Like Dan, you and your prophetic gifting, you have so deeply challenged me to step into we have had drag out fights. You have called me prophetic and I've been like, don't you call me that. I'm a priest. Priests are safe. Then I think, again, a true priest who's living into the full office is actually quite dangerous in a different way than the prophet. And you've invited me to move beyond soothing the bully, to take deeper risks and to name truth and trust that it's good and that there could still be love for me. Maybe not all the places I want to be loved, but the places I need to be. And Cathy, you have, in your queenliness, really invited me in some ways to own my power. I think where it's been really scary to try to stay and to step into leadership, and where it's felt a lot easier to kind of just remain in my immaturity in a way that I don't have to bear the same responsibility. And you have both exemplified that in my watching of you, and also in the many ways you have kind of said, come on, let's go, get in, let's play.
And I would concur in the sense that when I think about what it means to be a better priest, I often literally channel visually Rachael. And when I think about making decisions, even over financial things with regard to my home, I often channel directly the image of you, Cathy. And it is so helpful as an aging man to have models. And we are meant to be models for one another in order to, in some sense, partake, not devour, but partake in one another's giftedness in order to move toward all three being true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think when I think of the role of the queen, and my experience, particularly with you two, like I think, again, Rachael, I go back to the story of how you brought your prophetic and priestly care to me in a time where I needed some truth. Like I needed, but it needed to come from a degree of tenderness, and more than anything, I needed to be reminded of my name. I needed to be reminded of my story. So in the same way where you struggle with queen more because of your widow or wounding, I struggle with priest because of my orphan wounding. That still feels very tender, and I'm working on tending to that, but it feels less mature than the others. And I think you have tended, because you're a priest, you have tended to my orphan in a way that has allowed me to find rest, has allowed me to remember that I'm safe, that I'm loved, that there is enough for me, and that I can rest. And I think, Dan, that you have you stepped in ways where you almost like shake me and are like, hey, what are you doing? Like, come on, girl. Like, you gotta pull out of this. Like, you're in a tailspin. And tell me your deepest fears. Tell me what's going on for you. And I'm going to help you understand where is next, where we can go. And that's been so much of our relationship, Dan, is a sense of you coming and coming to me in my face as a provocateur, as someone who can see what is possible, but also meeting me with a lot of tenderness, with a lot of courage, and with a lot of that fatherly care. That's like, girl, I see you and you need to move right now. And that's been so good for me, because I'm like, I need that. I need that sort of presence, and I need your voice in that way. So, I think that's been so sweet to be able to see how each of you and a lot of people in our organization have ended up moving into those spaces. And we've done that for one another, where I've been able to call you out and say, Dan, you are abdicating the throne. This is yours to have authority over, my friend. Step in the ring. Let's go. And I think that's the power of how we get to interplay. But again, if there's not trust, if there's not mutuality, if there's not vulnerability, and if there's not a centering on the goodness of God and the fact that we are here to serve a God bigger than what's going on here, and we are meant for something more, then it will all be lost.
Amen. Well, let me just conclude with a couple core thoughts. Look, if you're in an organization and you don't have men and you don't have women, you're already screwed. You need to open the door to the vitality of the wide goodness of God. You need more than a few priests. You need more than a few prophets. You need more than a few kings and queens. You need to populate your organization and to bless the differences within your family, rather than to see that one is good and one is not so good. But as we end, let me remind you, you have a kingdom. And you are called to be like Jesus, and you are a prophet, and you are a priest, and you're a king or queen. And as we invite you to this conversation, we know there are tons of questions, which we will come back on, probably in a number of months, especially as the book gets closer to launching, to re-engage this. But let your heart begin to dream what is the kingdom that you are to say hell no through, and what is the kingdom that you are able to say heaven yes. And as you address those questions, your character, your calling, all we can tell you is you can have a mess like us that is both glorious, heartbreaking, but also transformative.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.